Hey everybody, I'm Sifu Bodhi. Today I wanted to talk to you about how our diet creates illness. And if you haven't already, do me a favor, please hit the subscribe button. Now, I have been giving this lecture to my patients for many, many years, and please excuse my drawing, it is not my strong suit. But diet can be so confusing. What do we eat? High carb, low carb, keto, carnivore, what do we eat? Um, what we need to understand there are certain things our body doesn't make, and therefore we need to eat them. These would be essential fatty acids, fats, essential amino acids, proteins, essential vitamins, and essential minerals. And these four things our body doesn't make. Now, understand there's no such thing as essential carbohydrates. We actually make sugar really, really well. It's called gluconeogenesis. We can make it out of anything. We can make it out of fats, we can get out of protein, no problem. We make sugar. So although we can eat sugar, we don't need to eat sugar because once again, we make glucose. So that being said, we need to understand how our body absorbs things. And so what we think of is our little friend here. Food goes down the esophagus, comes to our pot of acid. Our pot of acid is super, super strong, super acidic, closer to a vulture's pH, really. It can break down fat and protein, no problem, in lightning time. Moves down to the small intestine where everything is absorbed, and that which is actually where we're going to spend most of our time today. And then moves to the large intestine where we pull water back, and that's where it forms into the bolus or boop, and then makes its way out. Now, the important part we're going to talk about today is the small intestine. So we're going to come from here over here. And digestion is basically two pipes. One pipe is the small intestine, one pipe is the bloodstream. And digestion is food moving from this pipe to this pipe. And what's really important is the wall of this pipe. Now, the wall of this pipe is made out of little blocks called cells. And those cells are pushed really tightly together, called tight junctions. And over top of that wall is this slathering of, it's kind of like Vaseline, called a mucosal lining. And so between these two things, the mucosal lining and the tight junctions, these are two barriers that only allow a little bit of nutrients to permeate across the intestinal tract into the bloodstream, what we call permeability or digestion. Now, we only want a little bit permeating across, so just a little stream of stuff coming across, because if too much comes across, it sets off our defense mechanism, our sensories, our sentries, our security guards, our immune system. And because remember, the immune system is looking for anything forward to kill. So if we set them off, we got to let these guys sleep. If we set them off, then we get this immune reaction, this autoimmune reaction that happens when too much of our immune system is stimulated. So we got to make sure that these two barriers are very happy and healthy. So let's talk about the first barrier first. So first off is that I hope you know we don't digest food, but bacteria digest food. We are roughly 37 trillion human cells, 38 trillion bacterial cells. So we're slightly more bacteria than human. And of all the different bacteria that's in us, we have two families, one called lactobacillus, and that runs the small intestine and vagina, and the bifidobacteria, which runs the large intestine. And so these two guys are the regulatory bacteria. They regulate everybody, kind of like the shock collars. They make sure all the invasive bacteria, the bad bacteria, the damaging bacteria, things like E. coli, C. difficile, H. pylori, all the guys that get in us and then mess things up, that they don't grow too fast. And we get overpopulations. So certain things we eat, and this is where it becomes important about what we choose to feed this machine with. So we eat a lot of foods that we wouldn't have eaten in nature, specifically wheat, corn, and soy. And the problem with these big three is that here in North America, we spray 8 billion kilograms of antibiotic on our wheat, corn, and soy. It's a product that we spray, a weed killer that we spray, where the active ingredient is something called glyphosate. And glyphosate is a weed killer, but it's a trademark patented. Fourth patent is for biocide or antibiotic. Now, unfortunately, the glyphosate hasn't been working so well in the last 10 years, and then we added atrazine, a neurological disruptor. Really great toxic stuff. But let's stick with glyphosate right now. So the problem with adding antibiotic to those three is we feed our cows wheat, corn, and soy. And then so that gets into the meat, gets into the milk, and gets into us. So wheat, dairy, corn, soy, processed sugar, these guys are filled with antibiotics here in North America, which is really tough. And these antibiotics aren't counted when they talk about antibiotic-free meat because it's not injected into the meat, it's actually in the food as a part of the food. Problem, little loophole. So when we eat these antibiotics, the problem is the good bacteria grow really slow, get killed by antibiotic really easily, and live on short-chain fatty acids and cellulose, whereas the invasive bacteria, bad bacteria, grows really fast, is almost completely resistant to antibiotic, and lives on sugar. So wheat, corn, and soy, these are polychain saccharides, multiple chain sugars, so that are filled and covered with antibiotic. So those guys are killing the good bacteria and feeding the bad bacteria. So this sets up a bad scenario because when you don't have the good guys regulating everybody, the bad guys grow out of control. And the bad guys are never full. So these bad guys, when they grow out of control, they happily break down and eat this mucosal lining. One barrier not working. But what's even more important of this, what's called gut dysbiosis, this bacterial imbalance, which is super, super important and leads to the inability to absorb a lot of nutrients and making vitamins and minerals. This is a problem for us when we have this gut dysbiosis. But the other big problem that we are not talking about enough is when we damage these tight junctions. Now, we used to call this IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, and lately we've now come to realize this is what's called leaky gut or hyperpermeability. Now, how does this work? So we eat, when food comes down into the small intestine, this is where we absorb carbohydrates by and large. And so we're going to blow this section up here. So we have these same tight junctions here, we have these same cells, and we have our little blocks of sugar, our carbohydrates coming in. So on the wall of all of our cells, we have these little locks, and these are carbohydrate receptors. This is where a carbohydrate, little sugar can float along. It's the little key that goes, and the key fits in the lock. And when you put the right key in the lock, you get what's called a conformational change. It's a change of the protein structure, and this allows for the chemical reactions that are needed in the cell to be healthy. Whether it has to make new little organelles, little organs that they have in the cells, has to make a new cell, or has to allow nutrient transfer properly to the body. The problem is we also eat a whole bunch of things that are the same shape, and these are called lectins. You may have heard of this term before, and it's one of the defense chemicals that many plants have to stop animals from eating too much of them, specifically their roots and their seeds. So the lectin is an interesting one because this is in our wheat, corn, soy, rice, oats, beans, nuts, seeds, legumes. All of these guys contain lectins. And all of these guys, these lectins, are carbohydrate binding proteins. They are the same shape. They're a similar key that fits in the lock. But just like if you've ever put a key that fits in a lock, doesn't turn the lock, when this key goes in the lock, it has a different conformational change, has a different chemical release, different functioning happen in the cell, and it releases a chemical that we actually only found out about a few years ago called zonulin. And zonulin is a chemical that actually, once it's released, it actually destroys the tight junctions. And this creates gaps in the wall. And with these gaps in the wall allows for bacteria to float through, lectins to flow through, and we get what's called hyperpermeability or leaky gut. Now, leaky gut is not stuff leaking out of us. Leaky gut is stuff leaking into us. And when we get all this leaking nutrients moving through, this activates our immune system. And when you activate the immune system, all this stuff gets swept up here, and then our heart happily pumps it around the body. So you get this digestive inflammatory reaction or digestive inflammation happening. And when that happens, the heart happily pumps that around the body, and you get system-wide inflammation. And this is where autoimmune disease comes from. This is where cancer comes from. This is where Alzheimer's, dementia, this is where eczema, this is where asthma, psoriasis, IBS, Crohn's, colitis, arthritis all comes from. Even things like anxiety and depression. They all come from this system-wide inflammatory response due to gut dysbiosis and gut inflammation. Now, this sounds all a bit scary, but the cool thing is that we're healing these little holes in our digestive tract every day, every day. But the problem is that most of us are poking more holes in the gut lining than we fix. It's kind of like shoveling snow in a blizzard. You just can't get rid of the snow before more snow falls. And this is what's happening. We're designed to eat plant material. Yeah, we can have a little bit of it. We don't need it, but we can eat it. But we have to realize that certain parts of the plant are actually damaging. And there is a symbiotic relationship between plants and animals. So carnivores eat herbivores. Herbivores eat plants. And plants have the ability to convert sunlight using some oxygen and carbon dioxide. They convert this in a process what's called photosynthesis to create cellulose, create sugar, plant forms of sugar. Now with this mammal, we cannot process cellulose fiber. We have no machinery to process this. And listen, I'm a Buddhist. I would love to be a vegetarian, but you can't be a vegetarian healthfully. I love my vegetarian patients. They're always injured and they're always sickly. Sorry. The problem being is right here, because the first part of our large intestine called the cecum is tiny. And this is where we can absorb a little bit of short-chain fatty acids. We don't have the massive cecum that our vegetarian counterparts, gorillas, the chimpanzees, some of the lesser monkeys, they have a very large cecum. This is like 5 feet long. It's a big bag that they can, for example, for a gorilla, can just pack cellulose fiber in, pack grasses in all day. And the bacteria in the cecum then convert the cellulose into short-chain fatty acids, which are 100% saturated fat. So that's where it's getting its energy from, is fats. The bacteria that's breaking it down, as that dies off, releases the protein, and then it's where it gets its protein from. So a gorilla, although big and muscular, is not getting that from carbohydrate. It's actually living on fat and protein. But it has machinery to convert that into the necessary nutrients. We don't have this. We've evolved out of having that machinery. Our cecum is teeny, teeny, tiny. We can absorb a tiny bit of cellulose material and convert it into short-chain fatty acids, but this is very, very tiny. We just don't have the machinery to be a vegetarian and live healthfully. Now, one of the most important nutrients that we take in is, as we talked about, is our fatty acids, the essential fatty acids. And that's because our brain, 70% cholesterol. The myelin sheath that covers our brain is 100% cholesterol. Our spinal column, all the cells, every wall of every cell is made out of cholesterol. All our sex hormones, our testosterone, our estrogen, our progesterone, aldosterone, all of these guys are made from cholesterol. And so if our diet isn't high in animal sources, we just don't get enough fat in our diet. And this is a big problem because people are looking at a low-fat diet, especially for women who tend to be hitting menopause. They tend to be having a high-grain, low-fat diet, and this is no bueno. This is not great for any of us, guys included. If you're on a low-fat diet, good luck making testosterone. You can't make testosterone if you're not getting enough saturated fat. We also can't absorb A, D, E, and K. These are fat-soluble vitamins if we're not taking in enough fats. And yes, people are going to say, oh, I have my avocado and I have my beans and my nuts. And yes, okay, this would be great if the beans and nuts didn't have lectins and also didn't have phytic acid. And phytic acid is another one of these defense chemicals that chelate or bind our ability, rob us our ability to actually absorb minerals, absorb things into our body. And this is a big problem. So what we need to understand is when we have the carnivore, herbivore, and plants converting into sugar, converting that sunlight into sugar, and then the herbivores have that machinery. They have that big bag to convert all that fiber into short-chain fatty acids and protein, and then the carnivores eat the herbivores. Circle of life. So this is where it becomes problematic because a plant provides the herbivore with certain food. Now, a herbivore doesn't eat any plant. It eats a few plants. It eats a few leaves. And because all leaves contain something called oxalates, and oxalate acid combines with calcium in the leaf to form the structure of the leaf. And so when a deer goes along and eats a leaf, he's like, that leaf, oh, made my stomach feel bad, so I'm not going to eat that leaf. I'm going to go try this one. Oh, that didn't bother my stomach. Okay, I'm going to eat that leaf. So they eat a few different leaves. They don't eat every leaf. Our bodies do the same thing when we take in the leaves of plants. Those oxalate acids combine with calcium in our blood, creating calcium oxalate crystals. Those are toxic in our blood, so our body happily shoves it into our joints. And this is a major indication for arthritis. But we don't have any test for that, except for when we build up enough calcium oxalate crystals that we start getting stones, kidney stones, bladder stones. All these things, vast majority, are calcium oxalate stones caused by the plant material that we're eating, specifically the leaves. Now, this sounds crazy for a lot of people because if you think about, if you could visualize baby spinach, 5 leaves of baby spinach is the toxic limit for spinach when it comes to oxalates. None of us should be eating spinach. None of us should be eating Swiss chard. None of us should be eating beet greens. These are super toxic foods. Almonds, super high in oxalate acid. We use almond flour breads. We have almond milks. All of these guys are not okay. We are not designed to process this stuff. This is a poison for us. And that's the thing is some of the poisons we dig, caffeine in coffee, it's a poison. But we like the effect of that poison. Our body doesn't love the effect of that poison. Our adrenal glands don't love the effect of that poison, but a little bit, we can handle. So when it comes to the leaves, we can handle a little bit of it, but all of them do damage us. So we want to keep our leaf content to a minimum. Now, when it grows below ground, that's the roots and the seeds, a plant doesn't want you to eat that because then the plant dies. So that's where the biggest concentration of defense chemicals are, both lectins and the phytic acid. So those are the things that poke holes and damage, creating this immune system response, and also rob us of our ability to actually absorb minerals. Now, periodically, a plant does provide a piece of fruit. And as long as that piece of fruit is ripe, very, very little defense chemicals in there. Animal goes over, eats a piece of fruit, walks over there, has a poop, and moves the DNA. That's where the seeds come out and moves the DNA. And that's the symbiotic relationship between plants and animals, is moving of DNA. Now, no one's chewing up the seeds, and the seeds are coated, so make sure that goes all the way through digestion, comes all the way out. And this is the problem because we eat so much plant material that we actually don't absorb. And when they talk about fiber, everybody needs fiber. Fiber by nature is indigestible. It just coats our bowel. And most of us have about 1 inch of fiber coating our small intestine and therefore decreasing the absorption by about 30%. It's huge. Now, yes, your doctor will always tell you to, not this doctor, but other Western doctors will tell you to eat fiber. And this is because most people eat so much sugar. And if you're eating processed sugar, you're going to need some fiber to blunt that spike in your blood sugar. Otherwise, everybody's going to get diabetes, even though they're getting diabetes anyways. The big thing is to don't eat the sugar in the first place. Fatty acids, amino acids, vitamins, and minerals. We don't need sugar. We can be walking through the forest and pick an apple and eat it, nice trail snack, absolutely, totally okay. We don't need to eat it. We can eat it. But we're eating way too much. So this becomes this problem when we have this full system-wide inflammation happening in our body. But the great thing is we don't need medication, we don't need supplementation, we don't need all these things. All we need to do is eat what this machine needs and can't make. So all animal proteins, and we can literally eat 99.9% of animals we can eat. There's a few small exceptions that we can't eat, but every one pretty much that you can think of, you can eat. And because meat is actually fat and a little bit of protein. For example, beef is really 80% fat. Fish, by and large, is about 70% fat. Chicken, by and large, is about 60% fat. So it's a whole bunch of fat and a little bit of protein. And then we can process fruit. Yes, not a problem. Now, we don't need huge amounts of fruit, but anywhere between 50 and 100 grams of carbohydrates is usually what I use for my patients. I do not use a ketogenic diet, a fat-based diet. I do keep my patients in a low carbohydrate diet and a high fat diet. And this way keeps your muscles filled, keeps your electrolytes in balance. You don't have to worry about taking electrolytes and whatnot, because when we go full ketogenic, over time, it does throw off our electrolytes, so then we need to eat a lot of salt. And I don't love to, if my diet's not providing everything without supplementation, then it's not the right diet for me. But if we're eating animal proteins, 3 to 4 fistfuls. And we don't need to measure weight, just a fistful. That volume is what you need, and you need 3 to 4 of these, really 4 of these a day, whatever your fist size is. And then when it comes to the plants, the fruit that you're going to have, then once again, you can have 3 to 4 fistfuls, which is going to get you about 100, 120 grams of carbohydrate, which is a low carbohydrate diet. Now, there are certain plants that I allow for my patients, and these would be as long as you don't have any thyroid issues and as long as you cook them to death. This would be the brassicas. So these would be your broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, rapini, bok choy, cabbages, if I didn't mention that. These guys do have an effect on your absorption of iodine if you have thyroid issues. If you don't have them, it's okay in small amounts. Once again, as long as you're cooking them, do not eat that stuff raw. But in a perfect world, yeah, you wouldn't be eating that stuff either. Now, there are some fruits that do damage us. The ones I always avoid with my patients would be blackberries, raspberries, kiwi, which are all very high in oxalates, and then our nightshade fruits, which would be tomato, which is a fruit, eggplant, which is a fruit, and all peppers, which are fruit. The last nightshade is potatoes. And all of these have a chemical called solanine, and this solanine, once again, damages the gut lining, leading to autoimmune disease. So anyone with any kind of autoimmune disease should not be touching the nightshades: tomato, potato, eggplant, and peppers. But these really aren't food for us anyways. But every other piece of fruit you can eat. Now, and there's also a lot of things that people think are vegetables but are actually fruit that I use for my patients. Things like spaghetti squash and butternut squash, fruit. Things like yellow zucchini and green zucchini, fruit. Avocado, fruit. Peas, totally fine. And then there's a couple plants, couple leaves that don't bother us: arugula and lettuce. They don't bother us at all. They're on the lowest end of the spectrum with regards to damaging things. And that's pretty much how you look to build your diet. Now, you're going to eat stuff off diet. Yeah, you're going to go for pizza because it's amazing. You're going to go for a burger here and there. But the foundation of your diet needs to be 4 fistfuls of some kind of animal that flies, runs, or swims. Now, if it's chicken, turkey, or eggs, they need to be organic the best you can. I know they can be, the prices are insane right now for foods, but these things are super high in antibiotic because they only have one stomach and they don't process out the chemicals, especially all the wheat, corn, and soy that we feed them, whereas the cows and lambs do. But beef and lamb, no problem. It can be grass-fed, which is great for the animal, but for us, we actually don't need it. It doesn't transfer into us. So that if you want to buy grass-fed and grass-finished, no problem, but we just need beef and lamb. You can eat that every day. Chicken, eggs, turkey, you can eat every day, but those got to be organic. Pork, pigs only got one stomach, so they do transfer that all the omega-6 from the wheat, corn, and soy. So pork really once a week max. And when it comes to fish, unfortunately, listen, I'm Portuguese. I grew up eating fish many days a week. Fish really once or twice a week is max amount we want to be taking in any kind of fish, and obviously only wild caught, not farmed. Only wild caught fish, even though it's full of mercury, dioxin, PCBs, and now microplastics. So this is not okay. So twice a week when it comes to fish. People always look for vegetarian sources of protein. These are really not bioavailable in any substantial amount. These are not great sources no matter what you do. Pea protein, any of the seeds or nuts, these are not good sources of protein. Once again, because the chelators, the chemicals that bind us, our ability to process things, just doesn't make for a very good source of protein or any kind of vitamin or mineral. So this is really how we want to feed our body. 4 fistfuls of some kind of animal, 4 fistfuls of some kind of plant. The rest is not food. These things are food-like substances, but these food-like substances damage our gut and lead to illness. Doesn't have to be every day, but the last thing I want you to take away from this is that every time you eat an inflammatory food, piece of bread, it takes 10 days for inflammation to come down. So people are like, oh, you still have to live life, you still have to do things. Okay, so you eat 1 piece of bread a week. That means you're inflamed all the time because it takes 10 days. So 7 days, you're inflamed. If you eat it once every 2 weeks, out of 14 days, 10 days you're inflamed. So most of the time you're inflamed. If you have a cheat once every 3 weeks, out of 21 days, 10 days you're inflamed. So now you're at the halfway point. Not what I would call great, but that would be the shortest time. And then once a month, once every 28 days, roughly, or 30 days, now you're only inflamed for a third of the time. So honestly, that's how often we should be poisoning ourselves, once a month, if you really want to be healthy. And if you're fighting something acute right now, it should be 100%. There should be no cheats. If you're dealing with something that's been chronic, because it takes us time to rebuild this digestive tract. And the cool thing is that every 4 months, we have a brand new digestive tract. We rebuild all 4 billion cells of our digestive tract from top to bottom every 4 months. Now, unfortunately, most of us are just building a worse digestive tract every 4 months, our whole life, and we call that aging. It's not. It's just build-up inflammation. But you can pretty much get rid of any kind of autoimmune, any kind of inflammatory disease or condition just by eating the food that you're designed to eat. Please, I beg of patients every day to help me out, because no treatment, whether it's acupuncture, whether it's herbology, whether it's chiro, physio, Western pharmaceuticals, whatever the case may be, if diet is not correct, medicine is of no use. Period. Think about it. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you learned a few things today. Don't get upset. I know this is going to rock the foundation of how you're eating, but it will make you feel amazing. That I can promise. I've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of patients do exactly this, and every single 100% of the time, everyone gets better. Thanks so much.